welcome to episode 3 of Xity channel. Yes, it's now Xity, guys. No more Frogman Life. And the reason why we changed the name from Frogman Life to Xity is because we want to allow our viewers to segue from one platform to the next in a seamless fashion. And since most of our content are going to be about our journey in building Xity, we decided to stick with the name Xity. And the motivation for initially beginning with the Frogman Life moniker was because we are going to Liberia to build Xity with the mentality that we will thrive in various conditions, harsh or good. We know frogs survive swamps, dry land, deserts, water, and things like that. So the idea was that whatever habitat we find ourselves in, as the conditions shift underneath us, we were going to find a way to adapt to these various changing conditions and the changing environment. So that was the idea for Frogman Life, and that mentality hasn't changed. However, we just think that it would be nice for our audience and most of our followers to be able to seamlessly navigate from YouTube to Instagram to WhatsApp to Facebook, just following one channel name. So that is the motivation for switching, but we still remain committed to adapting and surviving in various conditions once we start this work in Liberia. So that part remains unchanged. So let's get into today's video. Today we are going to talk about learning. So when we started Xity, from the very initial stage, we had this vision that Xity was going to be this place that is not only about a place for people to live, but we want a place where people can learn, people can innovate, people can invent new ideas, and people can actually apply learned skills to bring about great changes in Liberia. And all of that rests upon our curiosity to learn new things, right? If we don't learn new things, we are going to not be able to execute on those grand visions that we have for Xity. So today's discussion is going to be about learning. Specifically, I'm going to tell you some of the models that I use for learning and how I practicalize those ways of learning in my life. So let's get started. So let's begin with talking about some of my favorite ways of learning. And today, let's just focus on one. And so one of my best ways of learning is learning through experimentation. Now, this may sound a little bit surprising to people who know my background as a theoretical physicist, right? And not only a theoretical physicist, as a string theorist, right? It's one of the, perhaps the most abstract domain of physics that you can go into, right? Where you are combining the most abstract areas of physics with some of the most abstract area of mathematics, right? So you live right at the boundary of these two very abstract intersecting concepts, right? And disciplines. So being someone from that background and telling you one of my favorite ways of learning is through experiment may sound surprising, but I'll explain why that is one of my favorite ways of learning. And just to clarify right off the top, so there are various ways to do experiment. You do not necessarily have to be an experimentalist by discipline to do experiments. In fact, as theoretical physicists, we do experiments on a daily basis in the work we do. We do experiments by conducting these types of mental experiments, and we build these mental models and we test them. Or even when we are solving abstract equations, that procedure is heavily guided by some theoretical experiments that we are doing. We may not be buying expensive equipment and testing reality of our equations, but in some sense, we are also really just doing experiments, and that's how we learn, that's how we prescribe, and that's how we predict how nature behaves beyond the domain of what currently is understood by scientists, right? But let's put that aside and just talk about now how why experimentation is one of my favorite modes of learning. So the reason why I love experimenting is that it actually it gets me out of a lot of trouble. It gets rid of a lot of biases that I have initially. So in experimentation, when you set up an experiment, before you get going, you hypothesize about what you are trying to find, what results you think you will find out of this experiment, right? And the results of the experiments can either lead you to reject those hypotheses that you form. And by the way, for those who are technically inclined, basically this is your null hypothesis, right? You formulate a null hypothesis, and your goal is to reject the null hypothesis when you find sufficient evidence that basically tells you to reject the null hypothesis. And we can go into deep and talk about type 1 error and type 2 error, but that is not the direction I want to go in here. I want to just speak about just that surface level of the scientific experiment and how it applies to my life, especially towards my thinking about Xity. So we will not dive deep into the idea of null hypothesis testing and type 1 and type 2 errors, right? If you want to learn more about that, or if you want to have deeper discussions on that, please reach out to me and we will have some fantastic discussions on that. But so what do I mean by you test and then you reject your null hypothesis? Well, a lot of times, say for example, you approach you have a worldview about something, right? And you say, oh, this is how every apple looks like, right? Every apple in the world perhaps is green, right? So that is your worldview about the model of the world, right? So, but is that really true, right? Now, the ordinary man would just go about living his blissful, happy life, believing that all apples in the universe are green, right? Now, but as a smart person who is curious to learn, you say, wait a minute, like, why did I even formulate this to be my worldview? Perhaps this is what I'm accustomed to seeing, right? In my real life, in the life around me, I always see apples that are green. Every apple I have seen are always green. Everyone I know who has spoken about apples have always told me apples are green. So this is why I formulated this worldview. But let's step back a little bit. Is this sufficient evidence to believe that all apples that exist are green? Right? So you could begin your experiment and say, my null hypothesis is all apples are green. Now, my point is to disprove that null hypothesis. If I fail to disprove it after sufficiently exhausting the possibilities of disproving it, then I can hold on to the belief. I can accept the belief to be correct that all apples are green. But I must first sufficiently exhaust every means to violate this belief of mine, right? And that is the process we use in experimentation. And as a scientist, once you do that, then you work hard and you work honestly to be able to sufficiently test all of the possibilities of disproving this belief that you have. You do not, because this is your original belief, try to be biased towards not exhausting the tests, right? Just so that you can hang on to this belief. That is not science. So the scientific way is to work against all of your intuitions and your motivations and your biases to really do a thorough analysis until you can exhaust all of the possibilities of disproving this belief that you have. So, and this is the way I live my life. I try as much as possible to learn from this type of experimentation and update my beliefs. And I think I talk about this a little bit in the documentation about Xity. So check out that link and you will learn more about my model of thinking. Now, so that is the reason why I love experimentation, because it helps me a lot. But in experimental model of learning, like, there are a couple of things that we must watch out for. And one of those things is to be aware that sometimes experiments can be costly, right? So take for instance, if I have a mathematics problem to solve, let's look at this equation. It's x plus 1 equals 3. So there are prescribed ways for us to follow and solve these types of problems, right? Uh, to solve these types of problems, we can use existing methods, but let's assume that we did not know of these existing methods that will systematically lead to the exact solution for determining what the value of x is in this equation. So the way you would approach this as someone who wants to learn through experimentation, you will first say, since I'm trying to determine the value of x, let's first of all study what this problem is. What this problem is asking us for is that if I replace x with certain number and add 1 to that number, that value should give me 3. So the left-hand side should be 3 and the right-hand side of the equation should be 3. Now, you can start by guessing, right? So suppose you take the value of x to be 1. So we see on the left-hand side, you substitute 1, you get 1 plus 1. Oh, the left-hand side becomes 2, but the right-hand side is 3. So the left-hand side seems to not be equal to 3. In fact, it is actually less than 3. So as you are experimenting, the other thing again is that you should be learning from the results, even the wrong results that you get from an experiment. And that is one of the favorite thing about experimental-based learning that I have, right? Because even the mistakes can be pointing you to some clues. Like for example, in this equation, the mistake we've made here is that we've chosen a value that is too small. But we need to learn that lesson. The lesson here is that the value was too small. Therefore, we have a sense of direction in which to guess our next number, right? We can guess a number less than 1 now, right? Because we know at most 1 is a wrong solution. All numbers less than 1 are incorrect. So we can guess, for example, 3, right? Oops, but if we add 3 to 1, we get a number greater than the right-hand side value, which is 3, right? So therefore, we need to pick a number less. In fact, you will say, why should we even guess 3 when we know we are adding a number to 3 and we want to get 3? So the number we should be guessing should not be 3. And you are very right. Like, we should not even be guessing 3. But let's assume that we are very naive. But what that teaches us in that process is that we get to learn what we could have already deduced by analytical reasoning, right? Just as we did here. We said, well, we want to add a number to x to give us 3. So that number cannot be 3, right? If we add 1 to 3, it definitely is more than 3. So that number cannot be 3. And we are already trying 1. So we need to go less. So we could have avoided trying 3. But even if you were as naive as me, right, your favorite dummy here, you don't want to not learn the lesson from this process that you substituted 3 into this equation, and then you realize, oh, so this was actually a dumb thing to do, right? But at least the point here is that you learn not to do this dumb thing in the next time. If I give you another equation that says x plus 1 equals 4, you know right away that x can never be 4. And that is the process of learning from your past experience. And that is why I love experimentation. But to love experimentation, it means you have to develop a sense of learning and generalizing your learning from small examples, right? Or from the specific, how you generalize those things, right? So you already generalize from the point that if I have x plus 1 equals that same a number, I cannot use that number again to substitute in for the value of x. So the next value you may want to try is 2, because we tried 1, it was small. We tried 3, it was too large. Now we try to come between, right? We interpolate between 1 and 3, and the whole number value is 2. And then we put in 2, and we know the results are well and fine. Now, this type of experiment, because it is just an experiment, hopefully on a piece of pen and paper that has no consequence on the real life, right? It is not a result that if you got wrong, someone is going to be thrown in jail or someone is going to be harmed. So the cost of failing in this experiment several times repetitively until you arrive at the correct answer is very less costly, right? And so to do an experiment, you must also evaluate what is the cost of getting this experiment wrong. So speaking of cost, the next thing if you are doing an experiment that you want to watch out for is to control your blast radius. And basically what that means is that when you are running an experiment, try to understand what is the impact of the failure of that experiment on your surroundings, right? It could be the impact of that failure on families, relatives, friends, or colleagues, right? On your life as well, right? And on your reputation. So for me in building Xity, right, that is one of the things I thought about very hard and long. What would failure mean um, given the grand vision of Xity? So, and what would I need to do to mitigate to reduce the chances of failing, right? I cannot claim that, and no one can claim this, that when they embark on such a project, like they already know beforehand that there is 100% certainty that this is going to work. It's never the case. And in my case, in some cases, in fact, the chances are very low. One example I'd like to show you, for example, when Bezos was starting Amazon, right? He told people, friends and families who were investing in Amazon at the earliest stage, right? He told them that, I think, I forgot what the percentage was that he threw out there. I think that was the probability of success that he assigned to Amazon. Now, you may be surprised and say, then why are you doing it, right? And what is the consequences of failure? Well, one, this is why from the very initial stages of building Xity, I've thought about the challenges and the risks involved, and I've made sure to separate the big risks from the small risks, and I've absorbed most of the big risks. And there are areas where the risk is virtually non-existent, and one of that example is the residential zone. The risks are virtually non-existent. You pay for a land, you are going to get a land, you're going to get a community that's well laid out, that is better than any other community you may want to live in Liberia, where you just buy an isolated acre or two and want to build your house. Like this one is definitely going to be like a risk-free investment, right? I mean, of course, there is always some error rate on anything you measure. So maybe the risk is like maybe 2%, 3% risk factor here, but that is nothing compared to things that we are talking about when we're talking about huge risks, right? And so those risks are completely separated away from people that I would not want to see suffer any potential losses. So I would take on most of those losses. Now, so that is the idea. So when you're experimenting, you're controlling the blast radius. But what are some of the things you need to do to control the blast radius of an experiment? One of the things that we can do is that if the experiment is going to be very huge and costly, it is good to reduce the problem to a small component that captures the essence of the bigger problem and test on the small problems, right? So you capture the essentials of the bigger problem and then you test on a smaller scale, so that if something fails there, the impact of that failure is not widespread and it doesn't go beyond areas where you cannot imagine the consequences, right? So for Xity, right, when I was thinking about Xity, the one thing I wanted to do was that I thought about this and said, one, I was starting from a very disadvantaged position in the fact that I had no experience in real estate development, no experience in construction engineering, right? That is not my area of expertise. So what do I need to do to succeed here? Those were my thoughts, right? So I'm coming in as this guy who is perhaps the least expected to succeed in this area, coming from theoretical physics, and my practical experience in industry has been in artificial intelligence and machine learning type of work, right? So it's nothing to do with like building physical structures in society and things like that, right? So what do I need to do to succeed here, right? So again, I went back to my experimentation, right? I said to myself, I need to do an experiment, basically. An experiment that will expose me to all of the elements of constructing a city. if not all, but the essential things that exposes me to those environment, right? So the listing, one of the components of a city is a building. To build a building, you need to think about plumbing, electricity, water, right? And even the layout, right? And protecting the security of the structure and all of that. So I decided to do that. And for you to have all of those elements in a building construction, it means that you must invest significantly into that building. So the cost need to be high so that you can be able to worry a lot about the security, and you can be able to make some serious investment in terms of the electricity and all of the other utilities, right? Because if you don't make a significant investment, then those things will be so low cost and so minimal that you will not really learn about the real challenges that you need to be exposed to tackle a problem like Xity. So my experimentation mindset led me to say, let me build a small 2-story office building. And I think I told you the last time about a 2-acre land that I purchased previously before embarking on this journey to buy the larger space for Xity. So I decided to build a small 2-story office space on one of these 2-acre land. So you will see in this video, this land is basically enclosed in a fence, and this fence, again, the same idea of having a low fence for people to be able to enjoy the beauty of the building is also practiced here, is practicalized here, right? All of the sides of this fence that is facing the streets are lower than the side that is between my neighbor and I. But so this is the idea. So I decided to experiment on something that will cost me a couple of $100,000. I know this is a large sum of money to use as an experiment, but if you think about it, right, is it wise to test on something that is going to cost you a multi-million dollars, or do you want to learn from all of your mistakes on a few $100,000? Right? So I think the answer is obvious there. So the 2-story office building that is currently undergoing, right? Significant part of it has been done. All of those important things that are needed to touch on the building have already been touched. In the video that you will see is an old drone footage of the building. It's not reflective of the current state of the building. It's slightly better than what it looks like. Now, just something to state out here is that this 2-story office building is actually very hideous. It's ugly, right? And the reason is because this was what basically I was cutting my teeth with into the construction and the real estate industry. So this was my first, right? And this is where I had to make all of the mistakes. And I learned a lot from building this, especially within the context of Liberia. So for some of you Liberians, you know all of the challenges that come with just doing something in Liberia, especially doing that when you are away from Liberia, right? So at some point I will tell you a lot of the lessons that I learned from there. But for today, it suffices to just say that I used something as a way to experiment, to learn all about the construction industry, to learn about how you communicate with contractors, to learn about how to start sensing from the very initial conversation whether you have some confidence level in terms of someone's ability to deliver on what they promise, right? So the things I've learned from building this 2-story office building is actually very useful. It's amazing how nowadays when I talk to contractors, right, from the very 1 or 2 conversations I have, I develop the intuition to pass or maybe work with them, because sometimes I hear certain phrases and certain intonations in their voice. It becomes so similar to things that I've learned that correlate to failure, that the moment I hear those things and I observe those patterns of behavior from the very early stage, I just terminate our relationship. The person go their way and I go my way. Would I have known all of those things if I had just not done anything in Liberia and just embarked on this Xity project? I wouldn't have known those things. Like I have a way of, for example, detecting people's potential for success, for example, in industry, in, for example, machine learning, science, right, AI, and things like that. But I have no way of actually evaluating whether someone who is promising this technical ability in construction or real estate or some type of subcontract area, right? Their ability to fulfill that. Like, I had to learn that anew in the context of Liberia. And this lesson is actually quite valuable for me because these are some of the models and the lessons learned from here I'm going to be using as I recruit, right, new people to assemble a team for Xity. And those are some of the things that we are currently doing, right? So when I talk to people, whether it's future residents or not, I'm actually, this is a two-way interview. They think they are only asking me questions about Xity and about how they can obtain land in Xity and things like that, but I'm also learning one or two things about them, right? Learning their pattern of behavior that can help inform me about like what are their opportunities within Xity larger context, right? That I can basically be able to pull them into. So I just wanted to share those types of insights. So building this two-story office building has been a very hectic task for me, especially doing that from abroad. I've had a lot of lessons that I've learned, how to detect incompetence in people who are seemingly overconfident. And I've learned to detect some degree of, to some extent, dishonesty. I do not have a way of, I don't have a lie detector, and I'm not even sure those things will suffice to be 100% able to detect every deceptive person. But I think I have developed some level of intuition, and the way I make my decisions have been revised because of several iterations from these experiences. And those are the learnings that I'm taking with me to the broader problem of building Xity. And one of the things that I'm interested in is really impacting the local talent in Liberia. And to do that, I must recruit, retain, and help local talent to grow. So the way to do that is that I have to find the right types of talent, right? I'm not looking for people who are necessarily top notch or people. If I get those, don't get me wrong, I'll be totally happy. In fact, I want people much smarter than me to come and really tell me how to solve this problem of Xity, right? To how to do this successfully. So I'm looking for those expertise, like really top-notch talent. If I have them locally and from abroad, I'm always on the lookout for that, right? People who I can basically consider experts in certain domains of this problem we call Xity, that if I want to make a decision on those areas, I should go to them and listen to what they have to say, right? But while I'm looking for that, I'm also looking for ways to develop the next generation of talented young people, right? Who will basically take over Xity and run Xity and yield great results for all of us, for themselves and for me. And so I'm always looking out for those type of local talents, people who are coachable. A lot of times there is a difficulty in getting that, but I'm always constantly looking for ways to find people who are curious to learn, because if you are curious to learn, then I can provide the opportunities, the challenges. Building Xity is going to be filled with so many challenges. We are going to run out of people to solve these challenges, right? And right now we need people to solve all of these challenges, right? So it is a rich environment for you to test yourselves, like to put your skills to that next level, right? And those are the people I'm looking for. People who know some degree of thing, but they are also aware that there is so much more to learn that they haven't learned. And if someone comes around with such a big problem that they can be able to use as a springboard to learn, as a classroom to learn, and they are willing to really commit and learn, like those are the people that I want, because those people are coachable, right? And if they are honest as well, that's one of the main things, right, in Liberia, that honesty factor, right? But Xity as a place is going to be very particular in terms of its emphasis on learning and that curiosity to acquire new knowledge and to apply them and to invent new knowledge. So that is one of my mode of learning, which is, as I said, it's through experimentation. On a daily basis, I'm testing new ideas, learning new things, and I'm basically scrapping all of the old ideas that no longer work or that have been disproven. I actually tend to very much live as close as possible to what I know to be correct. And I know I said this fast, and people normally it doesn't really clarify on people's mind easily. But what I mean is that if I know something to be the correct way of doing or of thinking, it doesn't matter what my way of thinking since I was a kid or since I was born has been otherwise. I'm going to start taking immediate actions, immediate practical steps, immediate changes in my life, right? Like real changes to position myself to behave in accordance with this new model of thinking. And I think for some people, for example, they divorce what they know to be scientifically correct from what they do in practice. I'm not that type of person. I try to merge those two things as tightly as possible and as quickly as possible. And so, yes, that is some of the ways that I learn. And I just wanted to share that. And those are the things that we are going to be encouraging in Xity. Learning, that curiosity to learn. We will be a city of people who are constantly learning and people who are curious to learn new things, and not just a people who will by default presume to know a lot of things that we in reality do not know. Thank you for listening to this episode, and as always, Xity is a place that is seeding a new culture, and that culture begins with the way we think, right? And also that means the way we think about learning. And this is just one way I think about learning and one way that I learn. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.